amazes me when people say somebody's just out for sex. They need a partner for that. You know, they need somebody that's going to be there, and not that the person who they end up having sex with, certainly if there's like they're tricking them, it's not cool. But if they're not as committed to it and they're okay to own up to it, to say, yeah, the sex was great. I don't want to go meet your parents tomorrow. You know, like I'm not ready to do that, or that's just not something I thought was going to be our path, and they can't own up to that, then that's what's shitty. And then that's what they kind of owe themselves to. So men can turn it off for sure. But I think that the experience of having your sex and the heart be together come from those times outside of sex. And if men are only spending time with a person who you're just having sex with them or doing some light activities to get to the sex part, then fine. But if you start doing things that the man really enjoys, or whatever that male partner enjoys, and they're starting like, oh, I really like this person likes to kayak, and they like the things I like, and they, you know, get excited when I get excited about my team, whatever, then that person's going to start attaching, if it's genuine, that person's going to start attaching experiences, and they're going to like the thing together. The other example is that sometimes it's too much, right?
Tell us how you really feel, Danielle.
I just
much?
For the listeners, I just passed out. Basically,
okay.
Not because I was bored, but because I literally just had the biggest aha in my head moment as you're telling me that. And this is why I love these conversations, because
haven't you ever had sex with somebody and you feel like, this is great, I really enjoy this, but like this person is not going to be somebody that I'm going to call next week when I have an exciting thing happen to me?
Yes.
Right? I think that men are allowed to manifest that in a bunch of different ways. We can just like, oh, she's just a thing, or whatever, I tap that and I'm out. Women are expected...
Said Andy never.
But women, I think, are expected to have more around that. Like, don't give it. It's Little Red Riding Hood. That's all that thing. That the whole. I hate to break it to you, but Little Red Riding Hood is about keeping your virginity and only giving it out when the woodsman comes and saves you. Like, that's the only time that whole thing. It's all that's about. It is. It's Little Red Riding Hood. It's just a clitoris. That's all the whole story is about. I'm serious. It's not just that.
I don't understand what just happened
so much.
It's so about that. Little Red Riding Hood.
Hood.
Okay, here's your little basket.
Hood.
Here's your little basket of goodies. Go take it and do a nice thing for your grandmother. But along the way, don't get distracted by crazy wolves who are sex crazed, who just want what's in the basket. And then once they get what's in the basket, and they devour you, you are saved by a woodsman who comes in and saves you, and then you are forever indebted to him. It is just a weird, messed up German rape fantasy. It totally is. I'm not kidding. Like,
I don't know if I remember the Little Red Riding Hood story.
No,
like that.
I believe that all the fairy tales have all
totally
been based on
and myths and like all the Greek things and the
totally.
biblical things. Like they're all there.
Yeah,
There's original stories. That is why.
Sex.
Danielle wants more booze.
Do you think that it's? I'm not trying to be ignorant here, but I do wonder if
two things. You can't start with I don't want to say this, but, and you also can't start with I'm not trying to be ignorant.
I know, because I do feel like I literally feel like a child in front of you two, because you know so much, and I'm asking all these questions, and I'm sure listeners are like, what the fuck is she asking these questions for?
I don't know half as much as he does.
Anyway, we back to the 1 time, 2 time, 50 times, whatever. Where am I going with this?
You were saying, like, is there a particular, like, not formula, but like when I know that I'm going to be sticking around?
For men, oh, no, I know. We talked about how many times when we have sex with somebody for the first time, and Heather's the outlier here because she always is the outlier. But Joanna and I were congruent on the idea that usually the first time having sex with somebody new is not great. Mostly like you're distracted, or he smells different, or whatever. Everybody's nervous, or that type of thing. Do guys generally feel the same thing? Like the first time usually kind of sucks, and you have to go back a second time. Or sex
is like pizza. Like some of it's better than others, but it's still pizza.
I don't eat gluten, so I don't know what
Fuck
you're talking about.
I don't think
sure. I think like sex for the first time with somebody new, where it's just going to be about sex. Like it's like let's just do this. This is okay, you're talking about like you're shaking your head.
Sorry, go ahead.
It's a coin flip, because part of it is where you're at. I think unfortunately some people do get really nervous about that. It's a scary thing to be in a space with somebody that vulnerable, and For men, we can always put on the kind of like bravado style of like, I know what the hell I'm doing. Like, what are you talking about? Like, this is what everybody else is into, because it's, you know, you could just be convincing. Like, men can just have this ability to be
He
charming.
thinks he's
and convincing.
FYI, in our head, we're like,
But
whatever,
their experience,
just,
I don't
do you.
I don't know that men, I don't know that men are capturing the experience of like, right now, this is happening and this is with me and this person. I don't think they're necessarily thinking of it that way. They're just thinking of, they're kind of, it's almost impulsive, or they're going to routines. It'd be different if you can like collect all the statistics and say, pay attention to these things every time you have sex with somebody for the first time. But,
Or
Don't you wish you could see it through a man's perspective? Because that's interesting that you say that it could just be impulsive. Because I'm trying to put myself in all of those like first time situations, and even then I am so right there.
because part of it for me, so
like, this
for
is
me,
happening.
because you were asking for a generality, and I just don't know. I don't know. But for me, the first time with a partner is always fun because it's all exploratory, it's all new, it's interesting. It's the same thing as the first date.
Do you feel like that's when you can pull out some new tricks that you've never used before?
You mean like
I
dance
just
moves?
had this realization.
Yeah.
The moment in which you
Like
should pull out the
tattoos?
new shit.
Maybe.
Because like you're not,
But
it's not like jarring
maybe-
to the person that you've been with. Like, oh my God, you never did this before. It's like, this is the first time I could do all this shit, freaky
guarantee you-
shit that I've never done before.
No.
Because I have had sex for the first time with someone where all of a sudden they pulled something out. I'm like, what the fuck is that?
Well, I didn't mean something literal. I just meant new tricks.
No, she meant like, that's what she meant.
Okay.
What? No, that's what do you mean? Not that.
No, you were saying like, what did you like? She was referring to a
awkwardness.
third object, and you were.
I was.
Okay.
I
right.
was referring
No, I
to
was
a third.
not referring to an object. I was just referring to like generally like something you normally don't do.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, no, that could involve a third,
Yes, it could.
third
An
object.
object.
And in this case, it did. And I was like, whoa, yeah, no, not what I
Too
signed up
soon.
for. Too soon.
Too soon for that.
Sure, and I do think that's there too. I think that for me, if somebody were to have like a kink, a particular thing that worked for them, and you know, biologically sometimes bodies work differently, and there are men and women who get satisfied differently, and there are some people who just cannot. It's called PIV sex, so penis in vagina sex. Some people do not arouse pleasure from that, and if that's something that it's why do you shrug your shoulders? It's abbreviation.
You
It's
know
not
all of this stuff. Like you have a whole dictionary of
Okay, so
sex
full disclosure,
info.
my ex was a sex researcher and still is.
Okay,
So,
great.
like,
So see,
I know.
that,
So
that makes
15
sense.
years of,
so
like,
now I won't roll my eyes
yeah,
at you.
thank
When
you.
when I first met him, I was like, oh my God, I met this guy, and he's more of a feminist than I am.
I'm more feminist than my ex-wife, who's married to another woman. She'd agree. The thing is that it's all fun and exploratory, and if you make it that way, and somebody's like, I don't know, let's try a popcorn, let's whatever, then sure, it's fun and fine. But that's just for me. It's always like what's happening with that person, and there's no boundaries. It's not because I need to find somebody who's really into this particular kink. That's a particular sexual desire that exists outside the moment with that person. If, yes, I feel comfortable with the person, I've been with them enough times where I feel like there's this thing that I really enjoy, or are there things that you enjoy, like having that conversation, it's almost always easier to have that conversation as foreplay or as like pillow talk, to say, that was great, that was lovely, I was, that felt great, surprisingly, or whatever it was, but there's some other stuff. Do you want to explore that? Just open questions, open-ended questions, and not say like, here's the list, I'll send you some bookmarks, call me tomorrow. Like, no, I think that if you have that conversation, if somebody is glued to something and says, I really need this to happen sexually for me to feel that's satisfying to me, that's probably a kink, and not in the sense of like kinky or weird, but it's a kink meaning it's tied to the person's desire to. It's not true. A fetish is something that somebody cannot derive pleasure without this thing present, or that thing in itself is what provides pleasure for them. It might not be related to sex. There are some people who just really like feet, for instance, is an easy one. People are like, that's gross. Like, well, but some people that's just something that arouses them. For kink, it might be something like when with a partner, I want this scenario to play out, but I have to be comfortable and trust that partner, because oftentimes those kinks might have a social context where if you were 22 and discovering it, and somebody goes around your social group and says she's really into that or he's really into this, that somehow manifests into who you are as a person,
Right.
and then you'll never get on the Supreme Court.
That just took a
Or
turn right with it.
it was a year ago. The confirmation hearing was a year ago.
I know.
Oh my God, that guy.
Isn't that crazy? So, but I think that men don't feel as comfortable talking about it because this isn't to like, oh, woe is us. Because, to be fair, white men have had a really rough go at it lately. So white straight men are really having a hard time. So in defense of all of them.
He's kidding.
I'm kidding.
He's totally kidding.
That's how I thought she's listening.
That was sarcasm.
The men also have an assumed position of power.
I was really uncomfortable for just a moment. I was like, wait, everything. This,
Women
you know
have
what
been
just
uncomfortable.
happened right now? You know what just happened was me getting all the feels for a relationship, and all of a sudden he just turned out to be a douchebag. And I'm like, what the? What just happened in my
That's
life?
when you push the check over. I'm like, I'm done. So I think that because men have that presumed position of like, if you want to call it power, I think it's really about power. But it's like, oh, you're in control. You're deciding. You are performing for me. And I'm an object for you to enjoy, coming from the woman's perspective. Men are just kind of given that. And so they kind of, okay, they'll just take the lane if that's what's given to them. They don't think it through. Whereas women feel like all the actions are related to judgment calls in some ways. Men don't think of it as judgment calls. They just feel like, well, here's the room. I might as well. I can always ask for forgiveness later. And they're not necessarily looking at those sex acts or that first time of sex as this is going to pace forever. They're just interested in more of it. And so I think if you are with somebody for a little bit longer, the first time, second time, sure, I get that. But I've been in relationships where maybe the sex didn't get good for a while, but it wasn't because we were bad at it. It's because there's other circumstances that are there.
How many times do you give it a chance before you're like, this is never going to be a thing?
Until you are absolutely sure that this is something you don't want to experience again. Because you don't want to be in a situation where you're with somebody and you don't want to be there with them. And if you start feeling that, you can always exit. It doesn't really matter. And I think that's, most people don't feel that they have that agency, that they can say, even in the middle of the act, and say, like, now's not, no, just stop. Like,
oh God, there were moments in which I wish I could have just had the balls to say, stop, please stop. I'm sure actually it was the episode with Heather that we didn't publish because we got super deep about a bunch of stuff. But yeah, there have been occasions in which, a potential partner in which I finally was like, I just have, like, it has to stop right now because no. So because
that's
I'm a chicken shit.
No, it's not because you're a chicken shit. I think it's part of it's because it's built into a narrative where men are allowed to demand things. Like, just witness it outside the realm of sex. Like, look at it in terms of like customer service. I've more often than not seen men complain about service in a way that is loud and brazen and privileged than I've seen women do that. I've seen women accept whatever comes to them in certain service organizations.
Just not go back, though. Isn't that a more respectful way to do it?
The society sets that up and allows that to happen. Like, you can have a loud, brash person, and if they're a woman, everybody's going to judge them and say there's something wrong with her. But if men are like, I demand that this is dealt with, people will certainly have a negative opinion, but not as negative. So the same thing in intimate relationships. I think it's the same thing. Women who feel empowered to say, this isn't what I want, this is not okay, or stop, and then get shit for that, that's not on them.
For me, it's not about worrying about, I'll just go specifically into this particular scenario. It's like, it was, and when I said I need him to stop, I didn't mean stop like in the act. What I meant was the relationship couldn't move forward because I knew this sex was never going to, I tried it and tried it and tried it again. It wasn't going to get better. My version of not saying stop was because I didn't want to hurt his feelings. But I don't know that was the right choice. Like, it was more like,
I think that if you were going to sell
I just cooled
somebody,
off the relationship as opposed to being
fine.
like, this relationship can never go forward because the sex isn't what I need it to be.
I think you should forgive yourself for that, because I think we have all been in relationships where we just don't know what happened. I've broken something off with somebody and felt like it's not worth bringing this up because it's part of their DNA, and I don't want to say, well, because it's this way, it's weird. It just doesn't work for me, and that's okay. That's an adult thing to say. I prefer not to continue the relationship. For you, in that experience, that particular one, the sex wasn't good enough, and you've already said that sex is important to you. You could have said, this isn't really what I'm looking for. And if they pry on it and say, look, it's not important. It's just a personal thing that I want, and I'm not going to feel comfortable. And even once you have that conversation, once you crack that egg and say, there's something that's not working for me, and it's not really comfortable for me to discuss it, that should be enough. Most adults, I think, will take that.
What if I would have discussed it and then